Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn webinar, Exploring Group Dynamics in Teen Foundations. We invite those of you on Twitter to follow along and join in the conversation by tweeting to @JTFN or using the hashtag #TeenPhilanthropy. And we welcome our new communications associate, Daphne Laskin, who will be tweeting with you today. During this webinar, we're going to learn about group dynamics in teen foundations from two terrific presenters, Sara Shapiro-Plevan, the lead consultant for Rimonim Consulting and a doctoral candidate in Jewish education at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and from Sara Indyk, who works at Rose Community Foundation in Denver, Colorado, where she manages the Rose Youth Foundation. And we'll paste their full bios into the chat if you want to learn more about them. So with that, I'm going to turn the call over to Sara SP.
Hello there, welcome. We're going to get started by taking a look at this whole big idea of group dynamics. Let's see if I can figure out exactly how to advance the slide. There we go. So today we're going to be talking about the group development theory that was created by Bruce Tuckman. This is already quite some time ago. It dates back to the 70s and 80s, but it's still so incredibly powerful and relevant for the work that we do today. So you'll see in front of you there's this beautiful cycle that begins really with the purple dot, forming, moves on to storming, norming, and performing. And originally, these stages of group development were a single part of one cycle. And then later on, as really the community of people who are concerned about group development and researchers in the area of group development identified a fifth stage called adjourning, which is also called mourning, and we're going to explore that as well. So we're going to go ahead and unpack these, each one a little bit. And the way that we're going to do this is that I will speak a little bit about really the roots of each particular stage and the characteristics of each particular stage. And then Sara Indyk is actually going to apply this content to the work that all of you are doing in the field. So we're going to start with, this is a double click. Let's see if I can do it. There we go, forming. This stage is really the beginning. Some people actually go back even further to think about this as groups coalescing and acknowledging potential in a group form, right? This is the move from individual to the group. This stage is really fascinating because it is about really the uncertainty that happens when we're all together and the desire for acceptance. Right? When we enter into a group, we lose our individual identity and need to become a part of something larger than ourselves. At this stage, there's tremendous dependence on the leader. That leader can be an adult. That leader can be a peer. That leader can be a colleague. But in some way, the group itself is dependent on that leader. This stage is also, as you may know, and as you may be thinking in your own, referring back to previous experiences that you've had, a moment at which individuals are avoiding controversy. We're learning how to know each other. We're learning how to get used to being in each other's presence, and we avoid conflict and we even avoid feelings, not just difficult ones. At this stage of group development, individuals in a group are working really hard to make themselves busy. There's routine, there's organization, there's creating documents and creating protocols and all kinds of ways of organizing oneself. And this is also, in this stage, an opportunity to gather data about each other, about the group, really forming first impressions and getting to know one another. This is the stage where individuals cease to become individuals and become a part of a group. And I'm going to turn this over to Sara Indyk, who's going to tell us a little bit about how this forming stage is actually a part of the work of teen philanthropy. Sara.
Thanks, Sara. So, hi, everybody. Rose Youth Foundation, which is the teen foundation that we run here at Rose Community Foundation in Denver, meets about 14 times over 7 months. And I'm not going to tell you a lot about the group because I know some of you do work related to teen philanthropy yourselves. But big picture, the purpose of Rosie Youth Foundation, the work that the teens are doing over those 7 months, is figuring out how to grant $60,000 strategically and in a Jewish way, and kind of wrestling with what it means to make a difference in a Jewish way through grant making. So this is a photo of the very first meeting that we hold every year. It's an orientation meeting. And I want to ask you to think for a minute about the words you would use to describe what you see in this image. And if the chat box functionality is working for you and you want to type in a word or two, please go ahead and do that. That would be really helpful for our conversation. And I'll read some of these out as they're coming in. Thank you very much, because I'm not sure if everybody can see them, but thought, engaged, attentive, getting down to business, serious, nervous, yes, absolutely, concentrated, great. So I think you all are very generous. Focused on the task and not each other. I think that's a great point. Serious, professional, intergenerational. Yes, this is the only meeting of the year that we invite parents to come to, so you sort of see them sitting around the outside of the room. Some words that I would add to the list maybe are formal, quiet, no one's interacting. And what happens at this meeting is that everybody comes in and they're in our boardroom, which has an intimidatingly large table that no one ends up liking to sit at except for the teens, ironically. And everyone is really on their best behavior, and there isn't a lot of member-to-member interaction. And we all know that feeling of walking into a new situation and thinking, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? So a couple things we do at this meeting really intentionally is that we are sure to, either as staff or our teen co-chairs, to tell people about who they're in the room with, so that they can start to get a little bit of a sense of the group that they're a part of, what people are interested in, what brought them to the table, what schools they go to and their backgrounds, just so that they recognize that these aren't 22 other random individuals, but that they are starting to be a part of a group. We also really explicitly reiterate the what and the why of Rosie Youth Foundation. So what they're going to be doing together over the subsequent meetings and months, and why they all chose to be a part of this experience, which hopefully is somewhat present in their minds, but in that sort of initial deer in the headlights moment, it's nice to have that promise of why you've come to the table. I wanted to share one other photo from the forming stage for our work that shows our two Rosie Youth Foundation co-chairs standing in front of the group. At this stage, they're really, as facilitators, they have to be very hands-on and active, and their work is much more frontal than it ultimately becomes as the cycle goes on. I'm going to hand it back to Sara because she's going to share kind of some more insight about how this stage can play out.
Great, thank you. So I'm actually going to briefly go back to the initial picture. And I was so excited to have Sara Indyk share this picture with us, because I think it really captures in just an image this experience of forming. Sara talked about the team members being on their best behavior. I was so impressed by looking at this picture how orderly this experience seems to be. Part of this forming stage is characterized by deep respect. Part of that respect is out of the trepidation that comes with interacting with new people, but it's a comfortable place for people to be in. We'll get to the discomfort later. Everyone here seems to know what's expected of them. I did notice with with the exception of only one person, everybody's notebooks are lined up and really orderly. This is a place where people are really gathering impressions about how other people present themselves, understanding how they should be presenting themselves within a group, and gathering this set of data that will help them to negotiate the challenging stages that are in front of them. One final thing that I think is worthy of mentioning is that part of this is about making new friends. When we're talking about work teams, it's exactly the same, and this is for a group of teens. There's a really important social component here where people are gathering data and sharing first impressions in an attempt to create a social community. And this is often something that we miss that's important to just be aware of, to understand how each person interacts with that social piece and how they're responding to their peers. Just to be aware of the social dynamics that comes with the forming of a particular group. We're going to go ahead and move on to the second stage. Let's see if we can get there. This stage is called storming. This is really stormy. It's the very first time that we have an opportunity in this group setting to feel vulnerable, to engage our feelings of trust and the anxiety that comes with needing to find trust in other people. And the first opportunity we have not to just express who we are in a social context, but to build concrete relationships with other people. By this time, people have spent some time together, right? This might be the second or third or even fourth opportunity for a group of teens to meet together. And relationships are really becoming visible and meaningful. But this stage is actually also characterized by some conflict. This might be expressions of disagreement, even some tension that might emerge. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is crucial to the development of the team. There has to be some conflict. People have to be able to define, especially teens, have to be able to define where they stand in relationship to their peers. An important piece for us and those of us who work with teens, and frankly for anyone who's involved in this kind of development of a group, it's important to know that in spite of conflict, that we can all be respectful and tolerant and patient. This is the agreeing to disagree phase, when we have to learn how to be respectful of one another. And again, this is a place where leaders and supervisors are able to give a lot of direction in helping to shape the group. That leadership might be a little bit more accessible and less frontal than in the first stage of forming. And that leadership might actually be working to solve and resolve differences between different members of the group. And really, it's important to acknowledge that for groups of people who have not formed groups in other contexts, so for example, teens and not people who've encountered, for example, workplace groups, this is a hard stage to move through. There has the potential to be some conflict, and it can be upsetting sometimes for individuals to have to interact with others in this kind of stage that really represents a great deal of adjustment. I'm going to turn it over to Sara, who's going to share with us this image and connect it to this idea of storming.
So when Sara and Naomi and I started talking about the content for this webinar, one of the things I shared with them and that I wanted to share with you is that while we definitely see discussion and debate in Rose Youth Foundation meetings, we haven't seen what I had typically thought of as a lot of really outward and explicit storming. And then we talked a little further, and I thought about different stages in our process, and I realized that there's something that we've done at our retreat for in different ways for the entire time the program has run, where we try to create opportunities and exercises that prompt some storming, somewhat artificially, but in ways that certainly, I think, preserve authentic takeaways for the group. So this image shows some of our teens participating in an exercise that some of you may have used or have participated in. Some people call it the Beast, others call it Tinkertoys. The challenge posed to the group is to work in teams to recreate a prototype that most people on your team can't see. So there's this object built out of Tinkertoys in kind of an inaccessible space. And each member on each team has a highly prescribed role with pretty tight rules governing where they can go, what they can see, who they can talk to, in some cases even what they can say. Their communication is really limited. And only one or two people on each team can actually see this item that they collectively have responsibility for recreating. It's a fun and pretty high energy exercise, and it's also a really thought-provoking one that tends to precipitate some of that tension and conflict that participants have to work through in this storming stage as they learn to kind of disagree or to face a struggle together.
Great, thank you for that. I was not initially familiar with this exercise and was really excited to hear Sara talk about it. And I just want to touch on some of the images that I took away from this picture. In this particular phase, right, we talked a little bit about needing to develop a healthy sense of tolerance for disagreement. And I immediately was drawn to the faces. You have two of the three of this trio who are looking, smiling, they're happy, they're engaged with each other, and one who looks like she's asking a question. I really noticed that there is some very powerful interaction that's going on as they are working to execute this project. And clearly they are negotiating something between them. They are learning how to interact with each other, testing out whatever that dynamic is, and learning how to be together as a group. Clearly, this exercise emphasizes some of that decision-making that we referred to before, and they are really learning in this particular small group about how to operate together, how to make, how to negotiate around arguments and disagreements. I mean, I can only imagine the conversation that took place. And I think really that they are really likely to have represented honestly, even though they're teenagers, whatever discontent and concern they might have had around the process. This looks like a really marvelous hands-on exercise. And I want to just represent that in spite of the fact that this is an exercise done with teens, this is something that we don't only think of as being a part of the storming process for teens. We can apply to, for example, the groups that we work with professionally, groups of colleagues. These kinds of hands-on exercises are really valuable when we're negotiating and we're moving through this stage with our colleagues as well. So this is, I encourage you to experiment in this regard with these kinds of exercises. We're going to move on to norming. I just want to acknowledge on this call that when I looked for images that described this phase, all I could come up with was an image of Norm from Cheers. And I know that might not be the image you were thinking of, but it was what popped into my mind. This stage, maybe in some way someone wants to do a little drush on how this is like Cheers, the TV show. But this stage norming is really about norms, right? It's about really establishing the values and standards of the group, the requirements for behavior. This stage really looks like the development of close and cohesive relationships. These are not always friendships. And it's important to acknowledge, especially with teens, that these don't have to be friendships, but they have to be cohesive and valued relationships. This is the part of the experience where people become woven together as one collective. They abandon their individual needs and really focus together on one goal, and they can come together and discard their own petty concerns, perhaps not so petty, but come together and enact the mutually agreed upon plan. They're working together toward one goal. This is the development of consensus in teen health that really puts aside individual concerns. And as you know, because you work with teens, this is a really big deal for teenagers, that they can move away from the process of individuation that they all normally go through as, normal, healthy young adults, and they give up that in order to join a community of friends and members of their age cohort. It's also the first time in this group development process that individuals and the entire group can take responsibility for working together. It's the first time that they can acknowledge that each person has a responsibility and perhaps even a specific role that will eventually contribute to the success of the team. This also sometimes is the place where people begin to lose their voices, where young women and young men can develop a fear of sharing, perhaps if what they view as controversial or something that they feel a little bit less confident about. They might be reluctant to share their ideas. This is about negotiation with the individual identity versus the group identity, and that is likely to be something that you will note some challenges around. This may be different around gender, right? This may look different for boys and for girls, for children who are younger, perhaps bar and bat mitzvah age, as opposed to kids who are older, seniors in high school. And it's the very first time that they're likely to be expected to do these kinds of things. This is not a part of the typical group development experience in a school, for example. One last piece that I want to mention is that in this stage, kids and adults alike, and I referred to this before, may be so focused on being good and being nice that they are afraid of conflict. I would say that it is not your responsibility to foster that, but to acknowledge that that place is an important place to be. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for a little bit about this image.
So this is an image of last year's Rosie Foundation request for proposals, which is a document some of you on the call may be familiar with. It's a written statement of what the group will fund, and it invites nonprofits to apply for grants. So in order to create a statement like this that starts with a letter, you can't see the bottom of it, but this is a letter signed by 23 teens, kind of to our broader community. All these members have to come together as a unified group, and they have to put the needs of the group first, sometimes above personal interests and passions, so that they can speak to the community with one voice. And I'm really intrigued and compelled by the idea that Sara just shared, that this can be a time when people can potentially lose their voice. I think in Rosie Foundation we are both encouraging people to lose their individual voice at moments, but also encouraging them to use their individual voice to benefit the whole group. So the way that plays out for us is our group makes their decisions by consensus, but I think really in any kind of well-facilitated decision-making process, there's a moment where the facilitator, or it can be a person at sitting somewhere else around the table, the leadership could come from anywhere, needs to find out what the minority opinion looks like. Say most of the group wants to fund homelessness, but there's a couple people at the table who are really interested in a different issue. surfacing those interests and, more importantly, the motivations behind them can end up leading to a better decision for the whole group. And at the same time, there also sometimes are moments, in our decision-making process at least, where there's one person who feels really strongly about a particular issue and it's not the issue that the rest of the group is embracing. And either through their own volition or sometimes with the help of a gentle facilitator, that person needs to be encouraged to kind of get on board with the rest of the group, hopefully not in such a way that stifles their voice or has them lose their voice, but that allows the group to move forward together.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move on to stage 4, performing, and I want to acknowledge just straight out that there are many, many groups as they develop together that never reach this stage. This is only stage 4, but it is possible to never, ever get to this place. This is where a group is just really motivated. They are motivated. They have come through the norming process. They agree on many, many levels of the values of the group and about their decision-making process. And for the first time, they are functional. There's minimal conflict. The role of the adult or the supervisor is really minimized because of the interaction of the group, of the team. They are, and this is, I think, especially exciting and relevant for teams, they are for the first time working autonomously as a group. They've developed this amazing body of knowledge and expertise that is translated into a feeling of confidence for themselves. And I imagine that in many of your settings, this may be the first time that kids are actually engaging with each other in this way. For the first time also, this the discomfort of this experience is channeled effectively. Disagreement becomes something that is simply disagreement, and members of the team, members of the group, and especially teens can learn how to disagree and still have respect and appreciation for other members of the group. Also in this particular stage, the supervisors or the adults or the leaders of the group are actually participating alongside and may have a voice in the process as equal or equivalent to the members of the group. And all of those parties are actually working together to make that happen. One other piece that I just want to mention, I mentioned at the beginning of this page that not all teams are able to make it to this stage, especially work groups. This is an instance where a change in leadership may shake the foundation of the group so that there's a lack of trust, and they might cycle back to the beginning, to the forming stage or even to the storming stage. We hope that that doesn't happen, but the fact is that occasionally it does, and it's important to remember that it's simply possible to go back to the beginning and begin again. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Great. So this is an image of a Rosie Foundation cohort with all of their grantees. The performing stage for RYF, I think, really comes before this. So what you don't see pictured here is a part of our process where our group of 23 teens divides up into site visit teams, and they go out into the community to meet with nonprofit organizations that have applied to them for funding to learn more about their work and to be able to come back and report back to their whole group about what they learned to inform the whole group's grant-making decisions. At this stage, when they're out on site visits, each of those little teams really has to represent the whole group and the program, and to some degree the foundation as a whole as well. The participants in the site visit meetings run the meetings, and we always have a staff person who attends those meetings with the teens, but they're generally silent or very nearly silent, and basically there as an observer, sometimes as the transportation, but not a whole lot more. The co-chairs, the Rosie Foundation co-chairs, so the group's leadership, they do participate fully in the site visit meetings, but really just as any other participant would. There is no one person running the show. This is one of the moments in our process where the facilitators, and by that I mean more our Rosie Foundation co-chairs than our staff, because our staff after the orientation and the retreat kind of transition into a supportive role fairly quickly. But by this point in the process, even our co-chairs, our elected team leaders, are kind of concluding a gradual transformation that one of my favorite facilitation teachers and mentors, Yoni Gordis, describes as moving from opaque to translucent to transparent in the group. And I always keep that in mind because it's easy to overlook when that happens really beautifully and well and successfully in a group. But it's quite artful when someone, especially a teen, can gently move away from being in a more hands-on leadership role to just letting the group do its work.
Thanks. I love that, the opacity to transparency. That's beautiful. Just I want to point out just two quick things about this picture. This is a group of people together, right? These are not the adults, the grown-ups, the facilitators standing to one side, looking on as the young people accomplish their goals. There is really a sense of team here, of group. And I think that it's important to recognize that somehow in this, there's a real sense of joy and accomplishment on the faces of these young people, right? It's not just that they're together physically. They are clearly of one mind, acting together as a team. And that certainly, the image itself conveys the sense of accomplishment that comes from that. We're going to move on to stage 5, which is the extra stage that was added later on in the late 70s. And this is something that I think is of extreme value in Jewish communal life, a stage that is unfortunately so frequently ignored, and something that I think that's very likely done very well in teen philanthropy. This is the stage of wrapping up and saying goodbye, and of shutting down business in a way that celebrates and honors the commitments and accomplishments of the group. For example, this is an opportunity to complete the task and acknowledge that it was a success, not just to wrap up and be done, but to honor the successes and the accomplishments. That is profound, very often not done. This can be a celebration. This is the end, so the group breaks up and moves on. Maybe they reconstitute, but maybe they never reconstitute in the same way. The group disperses. But all in all, there's a positive energy that comes from having accomplished something together. That sense of energy, though, comes hand in hand with this sense of vulnerability around change. They're not necessarily ever going to be together in the same way again. And those relationships that were established together in the group are going to change. And what happens at the end of this process, as we adjourn, we say goodbye. This is something that does involve a certain sense of mourning. We are losing something that we worked hard to do together, something concrete and something deeply emotional. We worked to meet a challenge together. When teams go through this process, there is a logical sense of loss and a feeling that they are no longer what they were, and a vulnerability that comes with that. That's a very important thing to do well, to celebrate, and to acknowledge the challenge around these, and to think about what the legacy of this group truly is when we contemplate what it was in the past. Sara.
So this is an image of something that we only just started doing last year with Rosie Foundation. Prior to last year, I think our only real conclusion to the work of the group, the only thing we did that could possibly connect to this stage happened at our group's final celebration, which is lovely because it allows the members to celebrate the culmination of their work in a broader community context with their parents and with their grantees. But we weren't really taking advantage of that more intimate moment when the group is at their last meeting together and it's just the 23 of them and staff in the room, and providing a space and a time for reflection and consideration of the future. So last year, at the end of our final meeting, which is when all of the grant decisions are made, our co-chairs asked each member to reflect on something they'd experienced in RYF that they hoped that future groups would experience too, and to record it on a sticky note and to share around the room. And that sort of became a closing circle discussion for us. And these are really hard to read, so I'll share just a couple of them with you in closing my remarks. One person shared that what they were taking away from Rosie Foundation was the knowledge that they really could repair the world. One person shared, making decisions is important, but how you make decisions is even more important. And someone else wrote, Jewish values touch all aspects of life, even if they aren't explicitly Jewish. So that is the last example from Rosie Foundation that I wanted to share, but I'll turn it back over to Sara to add a little more context for this slide.
Great, thank you. I want to focus on the phrasing that Sara uses to describe this stage, right? What is it that these kids wanted to pass down to future groups? They understood that the time that was bounding their work was over, but they were working together to develop a legacy, right? Their relationships were about to transform into something vastly different. Perhaps they wouldn't meet on a regular basis. Perhaps they don't go to the same schools and wouldn't be seeing each other again until they made specific plans to be together. But they were able to articulate very clearly that they wanted to create a legacy around their work. And that really is the point that I think is most valuable about this stage 5, the adjourning and mourning stage. It's possible to just quit. We've dispersed our funds that we've raised. We've made the decisions and the allocations. The checks are written, and we'll see you later. That is not the right way to end, although so many of us have been participants in groups that have ended that way. We know that we feel valued and that we feel committed to the values of our work when we realize that we have a legacy to share with other people and that the legacy will be taken seriously. And I think that piece really highlights the value of this particular experience for so many of our teams, and for anybody who's participating in a group like this. At this point, we're going to move on to sharing, and I'm going to turn it back over.
I just want to give I just wanted to give a minute for questions first, or
Great.
So before we move to sharing, does
Great.
anyone have any questions specifically about the content that was presented here? I want to acknowledge that some questions have come in the chat that relate to broader teen philanthropy work, and I invite you to please email me and we can set up a time to talk about the work of teen foundations. My email, I'll put my email in the chat, but specifically about this content, about moving through these stages and how they are reflected in the Teen Foundation process. So, if you have a question and you haven't yet put it in the chat, please do so, or you can press *7 to unmute yourself to ask it in that way. And I'll remind you about that. So I'm going to ask one question, which I think brings in a couple of things that some folks have asked. So how does this really inform what we do within the work of a teen foundation or maybe even any group of teens, are we suggesting here that it's just important framing so that we know what's happening if and when it happens, or should we be pushing the group into following this cycle of stages? Can either of you answer that?
This is Sara Indyk. I can share a couple of thoughts, but I think Sara Shapiro-Plevan will probably have more helpful guidance for all of us. When I first learned about these stages, I realized that in some ways they were playing out really naturally in our group process as it unfolded. And in other ways, we had just not been super attuned to this part of the process. I think it's really easy when you're working in a program that has pretty specific outcomes that it's driving towards to spend more of your time and energy focused on how you accomplish what you need to accomplish at every step in the process, and to spend less time and energy focused on the way that people feel and the way that they're doing the work together and these dynamics that are at play regardless of whether or not you're paying attention to them. And so it was just very helpful to us to start thinking about the how a little bit more intentionally and explicitly, because I think at the end of the day there are a lot of wonderful outcomes of youth philanthropy. Some of the most profound tend to be on the participants themselves, and those outcomes have a lot to do with how people feel when they're in the room, as much as about, kind of what they're learning about the community and the issues that they're focusing on.
Sara, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I just want to add one more piece to that. For all of you who are involved in teen philanthropy, you're involved in teen philanthropy. That's the goal of your work. But when thinking about how these stages sort of highlight that, I think that it's really important to think about the fact that ultimately we're all human beings, and we've all very likely moved through these phases in other contexts. And the value of being part of a giving circle or a teen philanthropy group is that we're a part of a group. There's a social and intellectual aspect to it and a psychological aspect to it that I think is really not to be minimized. There is, of course, the tzedakah part, but this is also about a way of organizing change in individuals that is about change in a group. And I think it's just crucial to remember that those two pieces go hand in hand, especially in this process. If I did not answer the full question, feel free to come back with something more specific.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I am going to, let's do this. Let's ask one other question, and then we'll move into some time for sharing. So I have a question in the chat. I'm wondering if a group can go through these stages over the course of one retreat or if it's more of a long-term process. Can either of you speak to, the timeline?
I would love to give that a stab. I think it really depends on what the focus and goal of that retreat time is. Right, retreats on so many levels are meant to be about intensive group development experiences. So I actually do believe that if done properly, this can be done over a weekend. It's hard, but certainly you can lay the stages. You can lay the stage for the first few steps to the process. Certainly the forming, storming, and norming can take place. I think the performing stage is likely a little bit longer, but I think it's really valuable to think about using your time most effectively. I understand that teen philanthropy groups don't go on and on and on and on and on forever. There's a natural limitation to that time, so perhaps attempting this in a focused manner will allow you to move further faster.
Great. All right, so now I'm going to turn over to Sara Indyk to move into some group sharing for the last 10 minutes or so of the call.
So we had some questions that we wanted to tap into the collective wisdom of this group to discuss a little bit. And the first is you've heard a lot about what Rose Youth Foundation looks like as it goes through some of these stages. And we'd love for everyone on the call to hear some other examples. So how have you seen one or more of these stages arise in your Teen Foundation work? If anyone has something to share about that, Naomi, are we just asking people to unmute themselves?
Yes. So please press *7 to share your experiences.
We can extend, so I know some people on the call work with Teen Foundation specifically, and others on the call work with teens in other ways. So if you work with a group of teens that's not a Teen Foundation, feel free to also share how you've seen these stages unfold in your work with teens.
This is Jessie Downey from University Synagogue in Los Angeles. Our teens are doing this foundation work as part of their regular religious school curriculum. It is their 9th grade religious school curriculum for the year. And what we're seeing a lot of is sort of our teens are sort of stuck in stage 2. They're having trouble developing trust, and there's a lot of sort of tension, primarily because they've known each other for so long. They grew up together. They grew up at the synagogue together. They've had classes together. And, obviously natural groups form, cliques form, and opposing cliques form. And so we're seeing a lot of that. I just wonder if anybody else sees that with teens who already know each other. So these teens are not coming in and able to establish that level of trust right away because they've seen untrustworthy behavior within themselves.
So I'm so glad you shared that. Thank you, because I think it's a totally different ball game when you're dealing with a group that may have a new task to do, but actually that has a lot of history and baggage that they're bringing to the table. And Sara Shapiro-Plevan, I don't know if you have any ideas or wisdom to share with us about what that can look like.
I just want to reflect briefly on the complications that are involved in that. And someone else earlier had posed a question about what happens when this breaks down, right? When this process, which it really ultimately is, breaks down. Bottom line, I think that what we need to do is to be able to, in spite of our acknowledgement of the coalescing group, remember that we need to be treating each individual as an individual and unpacking with them their interaction with the group. So, for example, if one teenager is non-compliant in some way and therefore promoting some sense of non-compliance with the rest of the group, it means going back to that child and understanding in a really relational way why the norms of that group are unappealing, unpacking the relationships that he or she has with the rest of the group, and working to build bridges between that individual and the other kids in the group. This is not about forging a stronger relationship with you as the adult, as the supervisor or the coordinator, but really helping to use the social norms and the peer pressure, which we might not always feel comfortable using, helping to bring those kids into alignment with the group. I think that only speaks to part of it, and I think for each one of us there are a lot of individual pieces that go into this, but I would never say that any hint of challenge or difficulty would mean that this process is broken. It simply means that we have to go about shaping the group and allowing it to evolve in perhaps a little bit of a different fashion.
Great. So here's another question we wanted to pose to the group. Tuckman's theory is based on how teamwork plays out with adults. We're wondering if anyone has observed things that are different about these stages when it comes to working with a group of teens. You've seen variations in what this can look like. Because teens have so much going on, hormonally, schedule-wise. Does anybody have anything to share?
I can jump in. I'm not sure if somebody else is wanting to jump in too.
No, go ahead. Great. Please
Thanks.
tell us who you are.
Yeah, my name is Lillian. I'm currently working in D.C., but the Teen Philanthropy program that I worked with was in Beverly Hills, at Temple Manual in Beverly Hills. I know there's an LA person on the line. I noticed that these, as with a lot of things that teens do because of just what their brains are doing in this stage of their life, things can be more extreme, to them. So what we see as adults as storming is healthy conflict and debate and whatever, which to a teenage perspective can get blown totally out of proportion. And then what we construct as challenges or, like I said, debates can turn into fights, at which point teens feel either singled out or that they're not being listened to or whatever, which colors the entire experience for them. So I found that in my position, in all the work I do with teens, that it's important, and I do use Tuckman's theory a lot in the work that I do, to acknowledge these stages and to say, just so you know, we're not fighting. This is a good debate. This is normal for where we are right now. And I want you guys to feel like we will get through this stage, and after this, good things happen. Because it's something that as adults we recognize as being constructive, but teens may recognize as being aggressive.
Great. So I'm very aware of the time and that we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to move on to the last question, which we wanted to close with. Does anyone have an example to share of how they've addressed the mourning and adjourning stage in their work with a teen foundation or with a teen group in general?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Loam in San Francisco.
Hi, Loam.
Hi. Sorry I was jumping in a little late, but I love Tuckman's theory, and I do a lot of group work, and both with Jewish teen foundations and out. And with the morning and adjourning stage, I find it's a common practice to put it off to the last minute. Really trying to keep the teens present in what they're doing, and like a little bit of a concern that if we start thinking about the end too soon, they'll start to pull out of the group dynamic or start to pull out of the efforts of the work. And so we really don't tend to emphasize that fact that the end is coming too much in advance, and we always make sure that there's something really significant to keep present with in the same meeting that we're having our conclusion in. So typically within Jewish Teen Foundations, we do our allocations at the very last meeting, and it's not till that meeting that we actually do our adjourning and closing for the year really as well. And so the excitement at the peak is at the same meeting as the closing. So we keep them very close together fairly intentionally. Because then we'll do an adjourning thing where we do appreciations, we'll do reflections on the year, we'll do program evaluation, we'll do a whole bunch of those things within the last hour of the last meeting together. And one thing we're looking to kind of adapt and change is after that meeting, we have our grant celebration where we share with the parents and the community and the grantees the work that we've done for the year and give out the grants. And one thing I'm going to want to experiment with is having our teens do more of the work of constructing that that experience, so that is part of their morning and adjourning stage, is preparing to tell people outside the circle what happened inside the circle.
Nice. Well, hopefully you'll be able to keep us all posted. Maybe there can be a part 2 of this, and you can tell us how that goes. I just want to thank everyone for the great questions and the great examples that you shared, and for being on this call with us. And I will hand it back to Naomi to wrap things up.
Thank you. I really want to thank both of you, Sara SP and Sara Indyk. Personally, it was a big treat to be able to work with you on preparing for this call. I think this content is really relevant to all of us. We know because we had a lot of people sign up, and it was a privilege to prepare and to hear from both of you today. So thank you so much. I also want to echo Sara in thanking everyone who contributed today. We really appreciate hearing lots of voices on our call always. And I just want to let everybody know that JTFN's next webinar will be on Monday, November 8th, when we will hear from JTFN's Director, Stephanie Zelkind, about bringing tzedakah into your Hanukkah celebration. So I hope you'll check that out. You can find the RSVP information, the link to RSVP on our homepage at jtfn.org. And with that, I hope that you all have a great rest of your Thursday and a happy Thanksgiving next week. And I'm going to unmute the call so we can all say our goodbyes and thank yous.
The conference has been unmuted.
There we go. So goodbye, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks a
I
lot.
can't wait for the recording.
With other kids like me.
We ensure the Jewish future by involving young adults in Jewish